Welcome back. So we're going to have a 5-minute audience participation piece. My friends Lauren and her sister Johanna Ciampa are going to take us down that road. Thank you.
Hello. All right. I moved by 2 states from Seattle to Montucky to follow a boy, something which as a feminist and an independent human, I had promised myself never to do. I now live in the healthiest home I've ever lived in, with the most functional family I've ever had, myself, the aforementioned boy, and our terror of a cat. It turns out the stupid choice to move for a man was the best life decision I ever made.
At the insistence of a good friend, I tried online dating. I had a terrible experience a few years prior and swore I would never, ever re-enter the dating arena. 2 months into online dating, a dashingly handsome bachelor messaged me about coffee shops. We met a few days later. Talk about risky. We just bought our first house together 2 months ago.
I once walked out on a volcano, which began erupting right under my feet. I ran for 3 hours and eventually made it to safety. I no longer visit volcanoes.
8 years ago, I took a risk and signed up for a social dance class in college. The course was 1 credit and taught everything from the foxtrot to country swing. I had never danced before. That fact, coupled with a fair amount of social anxiety, meant I was terrified to attend. A few weeks later, I met a really sweet guy who wound up introducing me to the love of my life. We're still together today. Despite all of life's ups and downs, we always know we can rely on each other and keep dancing through it. To this day, I have no idea what made me want to take that risk, but I'm glad I did.
When I was a small boy, my parents remodeled our house on the weekend. The workmen covered a large hole in the 2nd floor bedroom I shared with my slightly older brother. The cover-up, a sheet of plywood, was an attraction to the 2 little boys, and it wasn't long until we pried it up. My brother threw a stuffed animal, Millicent, into the hole and dared me to jump in and get it. At great risk, in I went. When the false ceiling in the kitchen gave way, I sailed down and landed on the floor, just missing my dad. I landed so hard, I became temporarily paralyzed and had to go to the hospital. Nothing lasting happened to me, and Millicent was safe, so it was worth the risk.
I've done some things that others told me were too risky. Ride motorcycles fast, had my babies at home, finished high school on my own, got myself out of homelessness, put myself on the line advocating for others, and lost my job over it. But none of these felt or feel risky to me. The biggest risk I've taken is trusting another person to love me and to love in return.
We're actually doing it in the balcony right now. Risque. Thank you, guys.
Joe Nickell is a lefty writer and the creator and co-host of the first television series ever broadcast on the internet. He plays percussion in the Missoula Symphony and drums in the band Motorhome, which once wrote a song inspired by a Tell-A-Something story. Joe's relationship status is complicated, which is how he likes it. Please welcome Joe Nickell.
I I was 25 years old when I first heard the word polyamory. I was hanging out with a friend from college, and he was telling me about these people who believed in an approach to romantic love, deep, committed romantic love, where you could share that with more than one partner, maybe even a whole network of people. And as he was telling me about this, I was like, that's my tribe. Where are they? Unfortunately, he had just read about it in USA Today. And I didn't know where to look. This was before the World Wide Web. It was before there was a Google. And so I just let it drop. 18 years later, I was on an online dating site when I stumbled across a question that changed my life. The question was, if a partner asked you to cut them during sex, would you? I was like completely horrified by this. But it did make me think, okay, so wait a second. That's a really vulnerable question that somebody posted on that site. And it made me ask myself, what is it that I have been afraid to ask for in my relationships? Well, the answer to that was very obvious: polyamory. I had recently come out of the longest relationship of my life. It was 12 years long, 10 years married. And we had shared more deeply than I'd ever shared with anybody in my entire life. And yet, in all of that time, there was one word that had never parted my lips: polyamory. It wasn't that I was unaware of myself and how I am. As a matter of fact, time and time again during my marriage, I would find myself falling head over heels, infatuated with some friend or another, even as I was constantly head over heels in love with my wife. And I just didn't know what to do with that. It's like none of the relationships around me had been modeled in this way. As a matter of fact, I grew up in Kentucky, the son of some really lefty, liberal, do-gooder people who modeled a kind of relationship that was, one man and one woman. They met in high school. They graduated. They got married at the end of college. They had kids together, just like their parents and their parents before them, just like every movie and TV show that I ever saw. But it was more than that, because when I was in high school, my cousin Matt came out as gay. Well, this was a wrenching experience for our entire Kentucky family. Particularly his parents, they were traditional Baptists who believed that this meant that Matt was going to hell to burn forever based on who and how he loved. And then, 2003, the state of Massachusetts, hallelujah, legalized gay marriage, right? And the pundits got on TV and they were like, you know what this means? The next thing that's going to happen, people are going to start marrying their pets. And they're going to start marrying their toasters. And they might even start marrying multiple people. And you realize at moments like that as far as our culture is concerned, I'm even more shunned than the gay people now, because I'm as bad as the toaster marriers. So, and even today, all 50 states you can get gay marriage is legalized, and yet I can't even link my Facebook profile to two partners. So I kept my mouth shut. Because see, here's the risk. Here's the thing. By coming out as who I truly am inside, I risked, ironically, being left alone. A born relator, forever single. That night when I was on the dating site and had this thought process that spun out, I made a decision, and I went back and I changed. Well, I didn't change all the answers, but I reviewed every question that I'd answered on that dating site, and I changed them away from what I thought other people might accept, and I changed them to who I am. And then I sat back and waited to see what would happen. The end of 2015, Christmas 2015, I was alone for the first time on the holiday. And I was starting to think that maybe this polyamorous dream of mine was just so much fantasy. And so I decided to get back on the dating site and start looking a little further afield. And I came across a profile in Spokane, Washington, I saw this photo that took my breath away. And without looking at any of her other photos, without reading anything she said about herself, without even seeing how she answered all those questions, I sent her a message and I said, "You win at online dating, and I have to meet you." Because, as far as I'm concerned, anyone who shows themselves standing aboard a rusty commercial fishing vessel with stormy seas in the background, wearing a big red rain poncho and a giant rubber horse head and holding a really pissed off house cat, that's the woman for me. And she messaged me back. And her name was Darla, and she was a Buddhist and a vegan, and we started texting, and it was like constant, just ridiculous, childish, like always on my phone, hundreds of messages a day. She came to visit me a week later in Missoula here, and the first time we made love, she looked me in the eye and she said, "I already know we fit." And I knew exactly what she meant, because I knew it too. And a couple of weeks later, I was trying to get my gumption up to talk about maybe this non-monogamy stuff when she said it first. She said, "What do you think about polyamory?" And so we started reading books and talking constantly about this stuff, listening to podcasts, and we talked and we talked and talked, and we loved and we loved and loved. And today, we share rings together to symbolize how far and how deep we've come. And I'm great friends with her other partner, Eric, who's a mechanic at SeaTac. They first bonded over their shared love of diesel engines. I know nothing about engines, so I'm really glad that Darla has an Eric in her life. Being poly in Missoula, it kind of sucks. I've dated a succession of mostly monogamous people who think, well, maybe this poly thing, I could maybe give it a try, until they fall in love, and then it doesn't seem like their thing anymore. But, then there's the case of Melissa. Melissa and I met a couple of years ago on a dating site, different dating site, and she messaged me back, and I was like, I get to go on a date with her? And she was so beautiful and she seemed smart, and then I met her and she just exuded this warmth and empathy that I was like, I need more of that in my life. And so we dated for a while, and then we kind of fell out of touch for a while. And then she came back to me because she wanted to talk about this polyamory stuff more and understand more about it. And so we started talking more, and we read the book together, and we ended up starting a Facebook group for local poly people, and lo and behold, there are some of us out there. Although it's a secret group, you can't find it because there are a lot of people who still are worried that they could lose a job, lose a family, lose custody because of who they are inside. And eventually, this relationship has blossomed into the kind of relationship where, next week, I am having a fairly significant medical procedure. And for most of you, you probably would ask your husband or your wife or your brother or your sister to be there for you. Well, to me, the person to ask is really obvious in my life, and that's Melissa. And I'm sure that during the day, she'll be texting back and forth with Darla, my other partner, and probably sending compromising photographs. And Darla will be happy that there's a Melissa in my life. Last night, I was talking to my therapist, and he's gay. He went through the whole revolution of the last 30, 40 years. And he said to me, "Joe, you're about to push back against one of the last great taboos in our culture." And I guess maybe that's true, but what I know is that as I have become more true to myself and more open with my friends and family and lovers about who I am, it has created what feels like a safe space around me for people to be more open and more vulnerable with me. And as a result, I feel more deeply connected and more widely connected with people than I ever have in my entire life. I was 25 years old something beeped. I was 25 years old when I first heard this word, polyamory. I'm almost 50 now, and I can finally stand up here on the stage of the Wilma Theater and say, hi, I'm Joe, and I'm polyamorous. Thanks.
Geoff Sutton is an avid traveler, and his favorite way to see the world is on a motorcycle. He has ridden across China, the Altai Republic of Russia and Serbia, Oman to the North Cape of Norway, and the most southern point of Africa. He continues to ride and explore new places around the world. Please welcome Geoff Sutton.
Hi, y'all. I want to welcome our guests from other places around the world. One of my favorite things to do is visit other places and learn about other cultures and other people. And one of the reasons why I like to go by motorcycle is because you're exposed to the elements, hearing the sound of the call to prayers in Oman or something through the helmet, and you're just right there with everything. And I love learning about a lot of other cultures and people and how they live. So this last spring, my friend Gregory, who's here, invited me to go on a trip down to the Baja by motorcycle. We both have big adventure bikes. I ride a 1190 KTM, which weighs dry about 500 pounds, and he drives a BMW GS, which is about 585 pounds dry. That's without gas, bags. The winter before, he and I had gone to Vietnam, and we rode Honda 250s, where you had about enough room for your rain gear, and if you wanted clean underwear, you just turned your inside out, and there we were. But this trip, we decided we'd do some camping, so we had tents and sleeping bags, cooking gear. We were just going to sleep on the beaches. So the bigger bike really made sense, plus we were going to go much farther distances. So we left Missoula, got to the Mexican border, drove 3 days, camped on the beach a couple nights, got to Bahia de Los Angeles on the Sea of Cortez. Rented a little palapa on the beach, and while we were sitting there, the guy says, hey, you guys ought to go to this little other place, San Francisco Zanquito, and it's a little bay but it's 130 kilometers on a gravel road. And he says, yeah, well, they did the Baja 1000 there a little while ago, but they just plowed it, and it's in pretty good shape. The Baja 1000 is a really rugged motorcycle race of 1,000 kilometers through Mexico. So I said, yeah, that sounds pretty good. And the next morning I wake up and beautiful sunset, but the night before I had sort of a bad feeling because I had been down here about 12 years before and on a BMW 650, which is half the motorcycle size of what I'm riding. And my friend Hank Harrington and I decided to ride part of this road, and after he fell for the 4th time, we decided, that's enough. So I said to Gregory that morning, I said, I'm a little nervous about this, we got to be careful, and we decided that if it was too bad, we would just turn around and come back. So we take off after breakfast, maybe about 9 o'clock in the morning, and we make it, 30 kilometers, and we get off, and we're kind of congratulating each other. It's beautiful, the desert's beautiful, and flowers are blooming, cactus everywhere, and we're both in our 60s. I'm the young one, and we're thinking, yeah, we're really out here doing this. This is great. And we go on, and the guy had told us there was a big hill, and that was the worst part of the trip. We get up to the top of the hill. I immediately dropped my bike and went, it's okay. We pick it back up. Greg says, I'm going to lead now. So he takes off. The road's really kind of gnarly. It's sand, it's gravel, and these are big bikes. We probably got 700-800 pounds under each one of us. So you're just going like this and gritting your teeth. And it was a challenging ride, but we were managing it, and we made it 100 kilometers, and I'm about 200 yards behind Gregory, and I come up over the hill, and I look down the road, and there's this bike on the road, and I don't see Gregory. So I go, oh shit, and I get all of a sudden hit about 12, 14 inches deep sand. And I'm just going like this, and I kind of ride my bike up to the edge and just drop it, run down there, and I see his helmet sticking out from underneath the bike. And I go, "Gregory, are you okay?" And I hear this, "I broke my ankle." And I go, "Oh, shit, we're in trouble now." So I run up there and I take his helmet off, and he's got blood running down his face. And trying to assess the situation, so I drag him out from underneath the bike, and we try to see if there are any bones sticking out of his leg, which there weren't, fortunately, and trying to decide what are we going to do. And he says, "Well, I got some pain pills in my bag there," but there weren't any pain pills. And I drag him up under the shade, and I kind of set up a tent and put some my fly up for more shade. When he crashed, it was 92 degrees. It was about noon, and we're 100 kilometers from town, and we haven't seen anybody on the road all day. So we're kind of going, well, what do we do next? Well, I got a satellite phone. So I get the satellite phone out. He's trying to call, and I go down and check my bike and to get some things off of it, which is about 100 yards down, and I noticed the gas is leaking out of it. So I'm trying to lift it up, and when I had rode up, I dropped it so it was downhill. I can't lift 600 pounds anymore, and used to be able to, but remember, I'm the young one, and so I go back and I said, "God, I can't get my bike up," but I had propped something underneath it so the gas quit leaking out. And Greg, and I sit there and he says, "I can't get anything on the satellite phone." And so he gives it to me and I start trying to dial it. He says, "Well, get out away from under the tree." And in the daytime you can't see the satellites going by, so I'm kind of going like this, and trying to find a signal. And I keep getting a message that says, "This phone isn't set up for Mexico," in Spanish. So no satellite phone. So we sit there for a couple hours. I have the tent set up. We have 2 gallons of water. And when I took Greg's helmet off, he was bleeding. And I said, "Well, let me wash that blood off your face at least." And he says, "We might need the water." And at that point, I kind of thought, "Oh, shit, we could be in trouble." So after about 2 hours, Gregory says, "I think we got to get out of here." And because we just don't know if anybody's going to come by at all. So I said, "Well, what's the first thing we got to do?" And he says, "Well, we got to get the bikes up." So I walk back to my bike and unload all the bags, and I carry an extra gas can, and I put everything on the side. And Gregory crawls on his 2 hands and 1 leg the 100 yards back to my bike. He gets underneath it, and the 2 of us, we get it up, but it's pointed the wrong way, and the sand's about this deep, and I'm trying to rock it back and forth. It won't go anywhere. So we kind of go, well, we saw this episode of MacGyver once. And if you put the kickstand down on a flat rock, you can lift the bike up on the kickstand, and he laid on the ground and pushed it with his good leg. So we spun the bike around, and I rode it out, and then I started loading my bags back up to the hard pack, and Gregory's crawling the 100 yards back to his bike, and we unload it, and we do the same MacGyver trick, turn it around. And as I was walking down there, it looked like this great big slug with 2 hands, because there was this thing. Well, if you know anything about dirt biking, you got to stand up, and you got to put your weight on the pegs on the outside. That's how you kind of keep it in the gravel and everything. I'm going, man, how's he going to do this? So another MacGyver trick, we duct taped his ankle together over his boot, and put him in second gear, and he got on the bike, and I pushed him on one side while he rode out of the sand. So we get both of us on the hard pack. It's now about 4:30. It's probably 95, 98 degrees. I'm sweating like a pig. I've been packing all these bags up and down through the sand. So we said, "Let's go." So we take off, and We get up to the top of the hill. We decide we're going to camp out. We camp out alongside the road. And the next morning, we get on the bikes. We ride all the way back into town. We get to a clinic. There's no x-ray, so he goes to another hospital 3.5 hours away and finds out that he needs surgery. And so 5 days later, he makes it to Missoula. But I'm at this hotel this whole time, and I was trying to take care of his bike, and they told me to put it up on the patio, so I took it up there and I rode it up the ramp, and I drove it right through the hotel door. That cost me $300. But the thing is that, we went to the clinic, he went to the hospital, he had x-rays, everything, no cost. The guy let me stay in the hotel, no cost. The guy gave me money to get home on. He fed me for 2 days. And when Donald Trump says, these people are bad, I say, you ought to come down here and see these Mexicans. They're pretty nice people. I would actually tell them they're better than those backstabbing Canadians. Thanks.
Brihannala Morgan has been working to protect Indonesia's tropical forests and the people who depend on them for over 15 years. When she's not causing trouble in the name of the environment and social justice, she's working in the garden or wildcrafting and making wine, jam, and other products to preserve the bounty for family and friends. Originally from Madison, Wisconsin, she lives in Missoula with her partner Jonathan and their amazing Whippet cattle dog mix, Tufa. A quick warning for some of our more sensitive listeners, Bria's story addresses a violent encounter with frank language. Please welcome Brihannala Morgan.
So I'm standing on the top of Mount Jumbo, and I'm wondering whether I'm going to paraglide off. It's an 85-degree day, and I've just hiked up there with my 25-pound pack, and I really don't want to hike back down. But the weather is not perfect, especially for a fledgling paraglider like me. And as my friends start talking each other up and getting ready to fly, I'm feeling less and less like I really want to fly that day. And as they're laying out their wings, I'm putting my pack back on my back, and I'm starting that trek down the hill. And as I'm doing that, I'm feeling this mess of emotions. I'm feeling really like I've made the right choice for myself, but I'm also just feeling frustrated and feeling like I wimped out. And I'm also thinking about why I made that decision, and if I would have made a different decision if it weren't for something that had happened to me 10 years earlier. So in 2008, I was 26 years old, and I defined myself as a nonviolent direct action activist. And what that meant is that me and my community of folks would hang banners or do blockades and risk arrest to bring attention to issues that otherwise wouldn't get attention in the media or by decision makers. And these actions, although they seemed really risky to people on the outside, actually tended to follow a pretty similar pattern. You would do the action, you would get arrested, but then you'd generally get let out pretty quickly. And pretty much always the charges would be dropped. So even though it seemed like something that was really like a scary thing to do, you kind of had an idea of what you were getting yourself into when you did these actions. So in 2008, as you may remember, China was hosting the Olympics. And Students for a Free Tibet were using this opportunity to bring attention to the struggle of the Tibetan people, to protect their land and to gain independence for their country from the Chinese government. And I was asked to participate at an action at the Chinese Consulate in San Francisco. So that's how I found myself at 6 in the morning, climbing 4 stories up the back of the Chinese Consulate in San Francisco with this incredible Tibetan activist named Nyandek. we were going to the roof of that Chinese consulate to do what we call a hangman action. And what a hangman action is when one person, in this case it was Nyandak, would rappel over the side of a building and then hanging, in this case 3 stories above the ground, she would use a series of ropes and she'd use a cloak to make it look like she was being hung. She also had a sign on her that said, "Tibetans are dying for freedom." My role in all of this was to do the rigging and was to set up 2 strong redundant anchors for Nyandak to help her rappel over the side of the building, and then once she was all set up, to protect her ropes and to talk to anybody that came up and wanted to know what we were doing, and generally to just keep her safe. So we got all set up. Nyandak was over the edge. She was all set up for the action. It was still really early in the morning. No one from the Chinese consulate had gotten to their office yet. So we were fine and it was quiet. Then at around 8 a.m., I see a door open to the roof, and I start to try to explain, "Hi, I'm Bria, we're here for this action," but they slammed the door shut, and for another 10 or 15 minutes, it's all quiet on the roof. And then all of a sudden, the door slams open and 5 people run out onto the roof. And I try to, again, explain using a calm tone of voice what we're doing there. But I don't know if they don't hear me or they don't speak English or they just don't want to talk to me. But I see that one man has a 3-foot-long steel pipe and another woman has a knife. And as I'm trying to explain about what's going on, the man with the steel pipe runs up to me and starts hitting me over my head and over my neck and my back, shoving me away from Nyandak's ropes. And at this point, I'm screaming and I'm saying, "There's a woman at the end of those ropes. We're here, we'll leave. Just please, just let us get out of here." And I see the woman take the knife and she starts cutting through that first set of anchors. And I am just screaming, and I see that first set of anchors go, and I see Nyandak's rope caught by that second redundant set of anchors, and at this point, I'm on the far other end of that roof, still being beaten, still being hit by this steel pipe, and I am screaming, "If you cut her rope, she's gonna die. She's gonna fall 3 stories to the ground, to the concrete." And the woman with the knife just cuts through that second set of lines, and I see the lines sever, and I see Nyandak's rope go over the edge. And at that point, the men who'd been beating me with this steel pipe, they grab me by my shoulders, and they pull me into the consulate, which is still utterly quiet. No one's come to work yet, and I've never been so sure that I'm going to die in my life, because I've just seen what they've done to my friend. And thank goodness, they take me and they pull me through the consulate and they throw me out on the street to the police that are now down in the front, in front of the building. And I have done a lot of nonviolent direct actions before, and I have never hugged my arresting officer before. But this time, I hugged my arresting officer because I was so happy to be out of that consulate. When I look around and I try to see what happened to Nyandak, and all I can see of her is her arm. She's fallen onto this concrete awning above the front door, and she's not moving. And the people in the Chinese consulate won't let anyone go inside to give her any medical help, so no one knows what's happening. And that's all I see of her because I'm taken away by the police officers to a maximum security prison an hour away, and I'm put in solitary confinement. And once I'm in solitary confinement, I'm able to at least finally take a breath, and I feel myself, and I see that although I'm certainly bruised from that pipe, I'm fine. I'm going to be fine. And 4 or 5 hours later, I get my phone call, and I learn that miraculously Nyandak's arm was broken, but that's it. That's all that's happened to her. And she was taken to the hospital for medical help, and then she was taken to the same prison that I was in, and she was probably in solitary confinement just in a cell next to me. And we spent the night in jail, and then the next morning, we find out that we are not, in fact, going to be deported to China to face trial, which is what we had been told might happen. But in fact, we are going to be released, and we're going to face probation, but that's going to be it. And so I'm physically okay, and Yandak is going to be okay, and we're free, but emotionally I'm a wreck. I had taken part in this action, and I had felt like I had some sort of idea about what I could expect. I felt like, although I knew there was a risk, I had no idea that I would see my friend, for all I knew, killed, and would feel like I myself might have been killed. And that lack of certainty just felt like it pulled a rug out from underneath me in terms of just my confidence in understanding what this world could give me. And I didn't want to take any risks. I stayed at home for weeks. But then very slowly, over the next days and the next weeks and months and years, I slowly started to be able to do those things that I love again. I started doing actions again, not quite as extreme as this particular action, but I also started, rock climbing again and solo backpacking again, and of course, paragliding, learning to paraglide. And as I was walking down Mount Jumbo that day, leaving my friends up top to launch, I reached my car and I felt at peace because I knew that I could feel the scars of what had happened to me that day, and I could still feel them hurt. But I also knew that maybe the next day, maybe the day after that, I knew that I was going to be able to hike back up those hills, and I knew I was going to be able to fly off. Thank you.
Mike Robinson has been a certified journeyman farrier for the past 15 years, working on about 2,500 horses per year. He has worked on just about every type of horse breed and discipline there is, from race horses to trail horses, ranch horses to show horses, drafts to minis, backyard pets to police horses. In addition to horses, he regularly works on mules, donkeys and burros, and the occasional llama, the occasional sheep, the occasional goat, pig, and cow, and he has tended to the foot care of species of ungulates he can't even name at the La Crosse Municipal Zoo. Please welcome Mike Robinson.
Hello. I was 30 years old and I felt like I was a character in the movie Office Space. Anybody seen the movie Office Space? And so I quit my job, and felt pretty brave in doing that, and I was excited. For a couple weeks, I had no idea what I was going to do, no plan. The weeks went on. I was probably about a month into it, and I was just a wreck. And I was thinking about crawling back to my boss and asking for my old job back. And I was talking to my sister, and she said, "You know what you should do? You would be really good at this. You should be a farrier." And I said, "Oh, what?" And she goes, "Well, you take care of horses' feet. You travel around. You work for yourself. There's horses everywhere. You can live where you want. And it pays pretty good." And I thought, that sounds great. So within a week, I was signed up for farrier school. If I had any misgivings about being a farrier, they were just amplified when I actually showed up to school. For one thing, I was about 10 years older than everybody there. A large number of them didn't get out of high school. I had a master's degree. They had the cowboy hat, and the buckle, and the boots, and they talked about their horses, the horses they had, the horses they wanted to get. They talked about all the stuff they did in the rodeo, and it just was a different world. I didn't fit in. I was talking with this one kid one day, and he was looking at me, and he said, "I need to ask you about your shirt." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "It says Trek." He said, "What? I never heard of Trek. What's Trek?" And I said, "Oh, my wife and I, we bought these Trek road bikes, and they gave us a shirt with a bike." He said, "You want to be a farrier, and you ride a bicycle?" Which was funny, but it was also true. But I really enjoyed farrier school. We spent about 2 hours a day in the classroom, and I enjoyed that. I was probably the only guy there who enjoyed that. But we worked in the forge and the anvil and working with your hands and learning how to shoe a horse. It was great. It was the antidote. I'd spent the last couple of years in an office or behind a computer, and this was great. The hard part for me was the horse part. I could deal with the foot, but being under a horse, these are scary animals. They're big, they're powerful. The school got some rough horses too. Yeah, you would tell the rough horses. In the morning, the trailers would pull up, and everybody would gather around, and these horses, they wouldn't load them, and you knew the rough ones right away. They'd just be bucking and all this stuff. But the kids, the young kids there, they loved it, because a lot of them were in the rodeo, and the whole thing with the rodeo, it's like it's a sport. It's you against the animal, and the rougher the animal is, then that gives you the bigger chance to prove yourself against it. So they would all be fighting over the rough horses, and I'd just stand back in the crowd and try not to notice anything until all the rough horses were gone, and then there's this 25-year-old mare that's just standing there asleep. And I'd volunteer for that one. And that worked pretty good for about 6 weeks. And I was standing in the back doing my thing. I think I was pretending to pull a splinter out of my finger. And Curtis, the head instructor, he says, "Hey, you haven't done one of these yet." And I knew my number was up. This is going to do it. I kind of went and got my stuff, and I get out there. And when you got one of these horses, you do them outside, and they have a little round pen. And it's a big show. Everybody shows up. This is going to be the most exciting thing that happens there that day. And I'm walking out there, and I just think I'm going to demonstrate to everybody here, including myself, this is not me. And when guys went out to the pen with these horses, they had a strategy. Everybody had a different strategy. They shared strategies. Some of the really big guys, or the dumb ones, they just grab hold and hold on, and the horse would tire out eventually, or send somebody to the emergency room, and that happened more than once. The second thing they would do is they use a twitch, which is a loop of chain on a stick, and this is kind of ugly, but you grab the horse's nose and you put that chain on there and you twist. And you could twist a little bit, but they would just keep twisting until that nose kind of turned upside down, and the horse would just buckle under the pain, and then you could go around and work on the feet, and he couldn't object. And I wasn't going to do that either. The third thing you could do is they would rope the horse. They'd rope it, and then in a way they would throw the horse down on the ground, and the horse would be thrashing around. And if you watch a horse when he's on the ground, when he stands up, he throws his head and his neck, and that uses that momentum to get to his stomach, and then he could stand up. But if he's thrashing and you could hold the head down, then the horse is going to be a lot calmer, quite a bit calmer at least. And so you would ask for help. You'd call out to the crowd, and there was this big guy. His nickname was Hoss. Everybody had a nickname. Hoss is a big guy. He'd come out, he'd sit on the head, and the horse would calm down, and you do that. And I thought that looked great. My problem was that I didn't know how to rope. Not even close. So this is a horseshoeing school, and you could ask any questions about horseshoeing, but roping was, I guess, a prerequisite to the school. Yeah. So that wasn't for me either. So I walk out there, and I had nothing. The only thing I had going on was I've been around a couple mean dogs. I should call them scared dogs, not mean. They're baring their teeth, and that's exactly how this horse looked. It's with the ears way back. And I was walking up to him, and I knew with a dog, you kind of let him sniff you. So I kind of look out, you don't look him in the eyes, and I walk up to him, and it worked. The horse comes up, and he sniffs me, and I'm standing there, and I kind of start to pet him, and he shies away, and I keep doing that. And after about 5 minutes, everybody's gathered around, and they had quite seen something like this. And so the heckles start coming in, and they say, "Hey, Trek!" That was my nickname. I said, "Hey, Trek, you're supposed to be working on her feet, not taking her on a date." Yeah. Yeah, these guys were just hilarious. But I didn't mind, because as far as I was concerned, this was going pretty well. Like, no one was hurt. I was just standing there petting the horse, and quite a while I get back to the foot, and I finally got a foot up, and then another foot, and it was probably 2 hours, and everybody had long cleared out as soon as they saw that there wasn't going to be a show here, but I got it done, and I was thinking, man, maybe there is something to this. Like, maybe I shouldn't be so intimidated by the horse. Like, maybe there's something that I thought you had to be born to it. I thought you had to be raised in it, but maybe it's something that I could apply myself and work on. So the horse part got better. School ended. You end school, you have a a final exam, a written exam, and I aced the written exam. And then you have this practical test. You got to make the shoes and fit them on the horse and trim, and you're graded on all these things. And Curtis came to me afterwards. He said that I got the highest score that he's ever get out as head instructor there. So I was proud of that. Thank you. He had only been there a couple years. In fact, the owner of the school, he came and he grabbed my elbow after this, and he asked if I'd want to stay around for a year or so as an assistant instructor. And I said, wow, that sounds pretty good. How much does it pay? And he said, well, it's more an honorary thing. You know, you get some more experience. So I said thank you, and I'm going to go get to work. We were moving to Minnesota after this, which is another story. And my wife, she left about a week early. She found us a house to live in, and she found herself a job. And I spent the last week of school getting my truck all outfitted. I had all the shoes and the racks and the forge and everything in back. And I was so proud. I had these business cards printed up. It said Mike Robinson, Farrier on it. And so I drive up to Minnesota. I get there at night. And the next morning, I head out. I wake up early, and I'm just so excited. It's going to be my first day working as a farrier. And I head out. And I have to say, most of the kids at the school, when they went home, you know, they had their horses, and their family had horses, and their friends and neighbors had horses. And they had a place to start a business, and I didn't know a single person with a horse. So my plan, I was just going to drive around. I was going to look in the fields for a horse. And then I'd pull in the driveway and introduce myself. And so that's what I did. And didn't go very well. It was a weekday, and I knew it was a weekday, and most people weren't around, and I would write a little note on the back and say I'm new to the area, and I'd leave the note on their door. So the people that were home, didn't go very well. Most of them liked the ferry they had. Thank you very much for stopping by. Or the ones that actually talked to me, that didn't go well. They said, well, you know, how long have you been a farrier? You know, a couple hours, I guess. Or, you know, tell me about your experience in horses in general, and that didn't go very well. And by mid-afternoon, I laugh about it now, but I was not doing well. I was probably as depressed as I ever been. And I got thinking, how did I get here? I had this nice, stable job. I had 6 years of higher education invested in this. And why did I quit? Like, what was in that job that wasn't working for me? You know, it wasn't my boss. I got my little timer going off. It wasn't my boss. My boss was great. The company was great. We actually did interesting work. You know, what it'd say about me that I couldn't do that. And then what am I doing driving around rural Minnesota, you know, pretending to be a farrier? I'm not a farrier. I'm just a fraud out here. And my heart was just had this pit of growing in here. Like, what am I doing here? I don't know. And so I said, you know, in Minnesota, they say you just got to have the strength to do what, you know, get up and do what needs to be done. And so that's what I was doing. I was going to work till 5, and it was almost 5, and I was working my way home, and there was a single horse out in the field. I thought, this is probably my last stop for the day. So I pull into the driveway and knock on the door. I start going through the speech. And she stops me right away, and she says, that's not our horse. That's our field, but we lease it out to this woman who has the horse, and her nephew comes out and trims it, so she doesn't need anything. And I said, okay, thank you. And I turn to go, and she says, but she says, we do have a goat. She said, you work on goats, don't you? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I work on goats. So I got my stuff, and I get out there, and I walk around the house, and there's the goat in this little pen, and I don't know, I guess there's different breeds of goats, I don't know, but this is a really big goat. And I walk in the pen, and he is not a happy goat. He's looking at me, and he kind of backs into a corner. He's got these antlers, and he kind of gets down to me, and I start walking to him, you know, hand out, don't look at him, you know, he's gonna sniff me. And I get just right up next to him, and he just rams me. He hits me right here, almost knocks me over, and then he hits me again, and the third time, it's just my instincts kick in, and I just tackle the thing. And I'm not talking like there's like a rodeo way to, like, bulldog. It's not that. I like high school football. I just tackle the thing. And I get just right up next to him, and he just rams me. He hits me right here, almost knocks me over, and then he hits me again, and the third time, it's just my instincts kick in, and I'm not talking like there's like a rodeo way to, like, bulldog. It's not that. I like high school football. I just tackle the thing. And it had been raining, and now it's muddy, and it's a small pen, so it's just piled high and goat crap, and we're rolling around, and this goat is strong, and he's screaming, and I'm rolling around with him, and I'm now into my high school wrestling, and I got the thing like a half Nelson. I got a leg hook going, and it was chaos, but I knew, I had been to school, and I was a professional, and I knew what to do, and I look at this woman, and I said, "You need to come here and sit on his head." And and she does, and it worked. The goat settled right down. I mean, it probably wouldn't have worked. She only weighed about 100 pounds, but she was about 8 months pregnant, and I think that extra 20. And so I get to the feet, and I'm really hoping it looks something like a horse foot, and it doesn't. And kind of like a deer foot. I'd seen a deer foot, so I start working a little bit, and I get it, and then all of a sudden, I think I'm doing pretty good, but I hit the quick, and now some blood starts coming out. So I move to the second foot, and I know where to stop now, and the third and fourth foot, it looks pretty good, and the goat stands up, and she goes, "That looks really good," and I say, "Thank you." And then she caught me off guard. She says, "Well, what do I owe you?" And I said, I'd done some research. I know that the going rate was $25 to trim a horse's foot. I got to think quick, like a goat. And I said, "Well, a goat's about the third the size of a horse." So I tell her, I say, I charge $10 for goats. And she pays me, and I'm on my way. And now I'm headed home in a very different frame of mind than I had been half an hour earlier. And I get home, and I walk in the door, and my wife, she's excited. She runs to the door and see me, and she says, "How did it go?" And I'm just standing there, just mud and goat crap, and I reach in my pocket, and I pull out this $10 bill. And she and I both knew that I'd spent a lot more that day just in driving around, just in gas. And this is why I love my wife. She looks at that $10 bill, and she just runs to me, and she throws her arms around me and gives me a big kiss, and she says, "I knew you could do it." She said, "I'm just so proud of you," and that's how I became a farrier.